The crystal chandeliers, suspended from the 30-foot coffered ceiling of the Pemberton Estate's main ballroom, cast prismatic rainbows across walls lined with original Monet paintings, each worth more than most people would earn in several lifetimes. The annual charity gala, tickets starting at $2,000 per plate, represented the pinnacle of Manhattan's social calendar, where old money mingled with new fortunes in an atmosphere so rarefied that the very air seemed to shimmer with privilege and power. At 47 stories above Central Park East, the Pemberton penthouse existed in that exclusive realm where wealth had transcended mere accumulation to become a form of social architecture. Persian rugs that had once graced European palaces stretched across Italian marble floors, while priceless artifacts from private collections created conversation pieces designed not just to impress, but to establish the kind of cultural dominance that money alone couldn't buy. Every detail, from the champagne flutes made of baccarat crystal to the orchid arrangements flown in daily from Thailand, whispered rather than shouted the astronomical cost of maintaining this level of luxury. But for all its breathtaking opulence, the Pemberton estate served a purpose far beyond mere display. This was the nerve center of a three-generation real estate empire worth $6 billion, a dynasty built on Manhattan's most prestigious properties and sustained by the kind of social connections that transformed business relationships into family legacies. Tonight's gathering represented more than charitable giving. It was a carefully orchestrated demonstration of influence, where political favors were traded over 7-course meals and billion-dollar deals were negotiated between auction bids. Richard Pemberton stood near the massive windows overlooking the park, his silver hair catching the light from crystal sconces as he surveyed his domain with the satisfied expression of someone who'd inherited greatness and multiplied it through shrewd calculation and ruthless focus. At 58, he carried himself with the unconscious authority that comes from 3 generations of social prominence, his hand-tailored tuxedo fitting him like a second skin designed to communicate power without ostentation. Everything about Richard's presence suggested a man who'd been born understanding the invisible rules that govern Manhattan's elite circles, which conversations mattered, which connections opened doors, and most importantly, which people deserved access to the kind of opportunities that sustained empires like his. Beside him, Victoria Pemberton moved through their guests with the practiced grace of someone who'd spent 30 years perfecting the art of social dominance, disguised as gracious hospitality. Her emerald Valentino gown, a shade chosen specifically to complement the Van Gogh hanging in their private dining room, complemented jewelry that represented not just personal wealth but family history, each piece carrying stories of social victories and strategic marriages that had built their position in society. Victoria's smile was perfectly calibrated for each interaction, warm enough to suggest genuine connection while maintaining the subtle distance that reminded everyone of their relative positions in Manhattan's social hierarchy. She'd mastered the art of making people feel honored by her attention while never allowing them to forget that such attention was a privilege granted rather than a right earned. Their son Brandon, 26 and fresh from completing his Stanford MBA, circulated among the younger crowd with the easy confidence of someone who'd never questioned his place in the world. Tall, athletic, and possessed of the kind of casual charisma that came from a lifetime of assuming people would be interested in what he had to say, Brandon represented the 3rd generation of Pemberton success, destined to inherit not just wealth, but the social infrastructure that sustained it. The evening's guest list read like a directory of American influence. Tech billionaires whose algorithms shaped global communication, real estate moguls who'd reshaped Manhattan's skyline, politicians whose decisions affected millions of lives, and cultural figures whose opinions influenced everything from art markets to social movements. These weren't simply wealthy people gathered for entertainment. They were the architects of American capitalism, the decision-makers whose conversations over champagne could shift markets and change lives. But beneath the charitable facade and sophisticated conversation, something else operated in the carefully conditioned air of the Pemberton ballroom. In the subtle way certain guests were introduced while others were merely acknowledged. In the unconscious manner conversations shifted when particular people approached. In the invisible boundaries that determined who received genuine attention versus polite tolerance. The evening revealed the true power structures that governed this rarefied world. The Pemberton family had built their empire not just through financial acumen, but through an intuitive understanding of social hierarchies that determined which people mattered and which could be safely dismissed. They'd mastered the art of discrimination, so refined it appeared as discernment, prejudice, so subtle it masqueraded as preference, exclusion so elegant it seemed like natural selection. What none of them could have anticipated, as they moved through their evening of calculated networking and charitable theater, was that among their carefully curated guest list sat someone who would expose the difference between their public personas and their private character. Someone whose presence would reveal that the very attitudes they considered natural advantages were actually fatal vulnerabilities, waiting to destroy everything 3 generations had built. The woman who would bring down their empire sat at table 12, engaging in animated conversation about urban development policy with a federal judge and 2 tech executives, her intelligence and sophistication so evident that other guests gravitated toward her insights without knowing anything about her background or credentials. Dr. Mara Johnson possessed the kind of natural authority that didn't require introduction or explanation. She simply commanded attention through the quality of her mind and the authenticity of her engagement with ideas that mattered. At 34, Dr. Johnson moved through the world with the quiet confidence of someone who'd earned every achievement through merit rather than inheritance, whose success had been built through brilliance, determination, and the kind of strategic thinking that transformed challenges into opportunities. Her midnight blue Armani gown suggested wealth without ostentation. Her diamond earrings caught the light with understated elegance, and her conversation revealed depths of knowledge that impressed even the most accomplished people in the room. But what the Pemberton family was about to discover would shake the foundation of everything they believed about worth, value, and what qualified someone to exist in their carefully constructed world. The assumptions they'd never questioned, the prejudices they'd disguised as preferences, and the social barriers they'd maintained as natural order were about to collide with a reality that would cost them everything. What this family was about to do would expose the difference between charitable giving for social status and genuine human decency, between inherited privilege and earned respect, between the performance of values and their actual practice. The humiliation they were preparing to inflict on someone they considered beneath their notice would return to destroy not just their social standing, but their entire financial empire. Before we see how one moment of cruelty brought down a billion-dollar dynasty and proved that character matters more than bank accounts, make sure you hit that subscribe button and ring the notification bell. What you're about to witness will show you why treating people with dignity isn't just the right thing to do. It's the smart thing to do. Trust me, when you see who this woman really is and what she's capable of, you'll understand why respect isn't something you can afford to withhold from anyone. The revenge you're about to see is so perfectly executed, so devastatingly complete, that you'll want to share this story with everyone you know. The stage was set, the players were in position, and the Pemberton family was about to learn that some mistakes cost more than money. They cost everything you've spent your life building. Before we see how one moment of cruelty brought down a billion-dollar dynasty, make sure you hit that subscribe button and ring the notification bell. What you're about to witness will show you why treating people with dignity isn't just the right thing to do. It's the smart thing to do. Trust me, when you see who this woman really is and what she's capable of, you'll understand why character matters more than bank accounts. The revenge you're about to see is so perfectly executed. You'll want to share this story with everyone you know. Dr. Mara Johnson had arrived at the Pemberton Gala through an invitation extended by Thomas Morrison, a federal appeals court judge whose respect she'd earned during testimony on housing discrimination cases. What Morrison hadn't mentioned to his hosts was that Dr. Johnson wasn't simply an academic expert on urban policy. She was one of the most powerful voices in commercial real estate investment, a woman whose recommendations could make or break billion-dollar developments across the country. As she moved through the ballroom's carefully choreographed social landscape, Dr. Johnson observed the subtle hierarchies that governed every interaction. She'd attended enough elite gatherings to recognize the invisible protocols that determined who received genuine attention versus polite acknowledgement, who was considered worthy of serious conversation versus social pleasantries. From across the room, Richard Pemberton noticed her for the first time during the cocktail hour. his gaze lingering with the calculating assessment he applied to anything unfamiliar in his carefully curated environment. Something about her presence didn't align with his mental catalog of appropriate guests. She carried herself with obvious confidence and sophistication, but he couldn't place her within the social networks that typically provided access to events like this. "Victoria," Richard murmured to his wife as she glided past with practiced elegance. "Do you know the woman at table 12? The one speaking with Judge Morrison." Victoria's eyes followed her husband's gaze, taking in Dr. Johnson's designer gown, her diamond jewelry, and the animated attention she was receiving from some of the evening's most accomplished guests. But rather than curiosity about Dr. Johnson's obvious intelligence and social ease, Victoria felt a familiar flutter of territorial concern, the subtle unease that came when someone unexpected appeared in spaces she considered her domain. "I'm not familiar with her," Victoria replied, her voice carrying the careful neutrality she used when discussing people whose presence required explanation. "Perhaps she's someone's guest?" You know how these invitation situations can become complicated. The word complicated carried layers of meaning that both Richard and Victoria understood without elaboration. It was their code for situations where social boundaries had been crossed, where people who didn't quite belong had somehow gained access to spaces designed for those who did. Brandon approached his parents with the easy stride of someone who'd never questioned his right to be anywhere he chose to go. At 26, he possessed the kind of casual confidence that came from a lifetime of doors opening at his approach, conversations pausing for his input, and social situations arranging themselves around his comfort. "That woman over there," Brandon said, nodding discreetly toward Dr. Johnson, "seems to be holding court with half the room. Do we know who she is?" Richard and Victoria exchanged the kind of meaningful glance that married couples develop when they've shared decades of social navigation together. Neither wanted to voice their growing discomfort with Dr. Johnson's obvious ease in their environment, but both felt the subtle wrongness of someone commanding such attention without proper introduction or social context. "Perhaps we should introduce ourselves," Victoria suggested, though her tone carried reluctance rather than enthusiasm. After all, anyone Judge Morrison considers worthy of bringing deserves acknowledgement. The suggestion hung between them like a social obligation none of them particularly wanted to fulfill, but which propriety demanded they couldn't ignore. They were trapped by their own roles as hosts, required to demonstrate the gracious hospitality that maintained their reputation for sophisticated entertaining. As they approached table 12, Dr. Johnson was deep in conversation with Senator Patricia Wells about the economic implications of affordable housing initiatives, her insights revealing a grasp of policy nuances that impressed everyone within hearing distance. She spoke with the authority of someone who understood not just the theory behind urban development, but the practical realities of implementation at scale. "Excuse me," Richard interrupted with the practice charm he'd perfected over decades of networking. "I don't believe we've been properly introduced. I'm Richard Pemberton, and this is my wife Victoria and our son Brandon." Dr. Johnson looked up with a smile that was both gracious and genuinely warm, extending her hand with the confident gesture of someone accustomed to meeting new people in professional contexts. "Dr. Amara Johnson," she replied, her voice carrying the refined cadence that came from years of presenting complex ideas to sophisticated audiences. "Thank you for hosting such a wonderful evening." The exchange should have been seamlessly polite, a brief acknowledgement between host and guest that acknowledged social proprieties without requiring deeper engagement. But something in the way Richard's eyes assessed her, in the slight pause before Victoria returned her smile, in Brandon's casual dismissal as his attention immediately wandered elsewhere, suggested that Dr. Johnson had been evaluated and found somehow wanting despite her obvious accomplishments and social grace. What the Pemberton family couldn't recognize in that moment was that their subtle condescension, their unconscious dismissal, their failure to extend the same genuine interest they showed to other guests, had been noted and cataloged by someone who understood exactly what those social signals meant. Dr. Johnson had spent her career navigating rooms where her competence was questioned before she spoke, where her credentials were doubted despite her achievements, where she was forced to prove herself worthy of conversations that others entered by birthright. She'd learned to read the microscopic hesitations, the carefully neutral expressions, the polite distances that revealed true attitudes beneath social performance. The seeds of the Pemberton family's destruction had just been planted in a moment of barely perceptible disrespect, a failure of character, so subtle they didn't even recognize it as such. As the evening progressed through its carefully orchestrated phases, cocktails to dinner to charity auction, the Pemberton family's discomfort with Dr. Johnson's presence evolved into something more deliberate and pointed. What had begun as unconscious assessment transformed into active exclusion, each slight building upon the last with the methodical precision of people who'd perfected the art of social warfare. During the dinner service, when conversations naturally fragmented into smaller groups, Dr. Johnson found herself increasingly isolated despite her attempts to engage with the discussions flowing around her. When she offered insights into the urban development policies being debated at her table, Richard would acknowledge her comments with the kind of polite nod reserved for uninformed opinions, then immediately redirect the conversation to someone whose expertise he considered more credible. As I was saying to Mayor Bloomberg last week, Richard would begin, his phrasing designed to establish both his access to power and his dismissal of whatever Dr. Johnson had just contributed. The technique was subtle but devastating, acknowledging her words just enough to avoid outright rudeness, while making it clear that her perspective carried no weight in conversations that mattered. Victoria's approach was even more refined, wielding social exclusion like a precision instrument. When Dr. Johnson attempted to join a discussion about the Metropolitan Museum's upcoming exhibition, Victoria would respond with the kind of bright, empty enthusiasm reserved for children who'd said something amusing but irrelevant. "How lovely that you're interested in art," Victoria would say, her smile never wavering, while her tone conveyed the message that interest, without true understanding, was somehow endearing in its naivety. "I serve on the Met's acquisition committee, so we're deeply involved in these decisions. Perhaps you'd enjoy the public tours they offer." The suggestion hung in the air like a perfectly aimed arrow, designed to remind Dr. Johnson of her presumed position outside the circles where cultural decisions were actually made. Brandon's dismissal was more direct, carrying the casual cruelty that came from never having been forced to consider other people's feelings as consequential. When Dr. Johnson attempted to contribute to a conversation about Stanford's business program, which she'd helped design during her consulting work, Brandon interrupted with a kind of confident ignorance that mistook privilege for expertise. "I think you might be thinking of a different program," he said with the patronizing smile of someone correcting an obvious mistake. "I just graduated from Stanford's MBA program, so I definitely know if they had the kind of initiatives you're describing." Each slight built upon the previous one, creating a pattern of exclusion that grew more apparent as the evening continued. Other guests began to notice the subtle but consistent way conversations seemed to redirect when Dr. Johnson spoke, how her contributions were acknowledged but never built upon, how she was included in discussions just enough to avoid outright rudeness, while being systematically marginalized in ways that questioned her credibility and expertise. The careful cultivation of disrespect was approaching its crescendo, and Dr. Johnson understood with crystalline clarity that what she was experiencing wasn't accidental oversight, but deliberate strategy. The Pemberton family was demonstrating exactly who they believed belonged in their world, and who was merely tolerating by their grace. Did you see the ice-cold composure of someone who knows exactly how to handle bullies? What this woman is about to do will prove that success is the best revenge, and dignity is the most powerful weapon. If you're loving this story of karma coming full circle, smash that subscribe button because we've got the most satisfying ending coming up that will restore your faith in justice. Drop a comment and tell me what you would have done in Dr. Johnson's position. Would you have walked away with such grace, or would you have put them in their place right there? The revenge that's coming is so perfect, so precisely executed, that it'll give you chills. Stay tuned, because what happens next will change everything. The charity auction commenced with the theatrical grandeur that Manhattan's elite had come to expect from Pemberton events. The ballroom's lighting dimmed to focus attention on the podium where priceless artifacts and exclusive experiences would be offered to the highest bidders. This wasn't simply fundraising. It was social theater where generosity served as performance, where the size of one's bid announced not just wealth, but cultural priorities and social standing. Victoria had positioned herself near the front, her emerald gown catching the spotlight as she prepared to demonstrate the kind of conspicuous philanthropy that maintained the family's reputation for community leadership. Tonight's featured item was a week-long stay at their private estate in the Hamptons, complete with yacht access and personal chef service, a prize that would raise substantial funds while showcasing the lifestyle that made the Pemberton name synonymous with luxury. Dr. Johnson sat at table 12, her attention focused on the auction proceedings with a kind of analytical interest that suggested genuine engagement rather than social obligation. She participated in dozens of similar events, understanding that these gatherings served multiple purposes beyond their charitable facades. They were networking opportunities, social positioning exercises, and demonstrations of community influence, all wrapped in the acceptable framework of giving back. When the auctioneer announced the Hamptons estate package with its starting bid of $50,000, several hands immediately rose around the ballroom. The usual suspects began their familiar dance of competitive generosity: tech billionaires, real estate moguls, and old money families who treated these auctions as public validation of their continued relevance in Manhattan's social hierarchy. $75,000, called out Senator Wells, her bid acknowledging both the value of the experience and her understanding of the political capital that came from supporting the Pemberton family's charitable initiatives. $100,000, countered Marcus Chun, the venture capitalist whose art collection rivaled that of major museums and whose presence at events like this signaled his transition from new money to established influence. The bidding continued with the practiced rhythm of people for whom these amounts represented social positioning rather than financial sacrifice, each increase accompanied by the kind of appreciative murmurs that suggested the audience understood they were witnessing not just generosity, but strategic relationship building. It was at the $150,000 mark that Dr. Johnson raised her paddle for the first time, her gesture confident and deliberate despite the sudden silence that fell over her section of the ballroom. The bid was substantial enough to command serious attention, high enough to suggest she understood the social stakes involved in these proceedings. Victoria's reaction was immediate and visceral, her carefully maintained composure cracking slightly as she processed the audacity of someone she'd spent the evening systematically excluding, now attempting to participate in the auction's most prestigious offering. The bid wasn't just about money, it was about access, about claiming a place in the social circles that the Hamptons estate represented. "Excuse me," Victoria called out, her voice carrying across the ballroom with a kind of authority that stopped conversations and redirected attention. "I think there might be some confusion about the bidding process." The auctioneer paused, clearly uncomfortable with the interruption, but unable to ignore someone of Victoria's standing. "Is there a problem, Mrs. Pemberton?" Victoria's smile remained perfect as she addressed the room, her words chosen with surgical precision to accomplish maximum humiliation while maintaining plausible deniability. "I just want to make sure everyone understands that this auction is for serious bidders only. We're discussing amounts that require significant financial verification, and I'd hate for anyone to find themselves in an embarrassing situation." The implication hung in the air like poison, transforming what should have been a moment of charitable participation into a public questioning of Dr. Johnson's financial credibility. Every eye in the ballroom turned toward table 12, where Dr. Johnson sat with a kind of composed dignity that came from years of navigating exactly these types of challenges. "Mrs. Pemberton," Dr. Johnson replied, her voice carrying clearly across the silent ballroom, "I appreciate your concern for proper procedures. Perhaps you'd prefer to see financial verification before allowing the bidding to continue." The challenge was delivered with such calm professionalism that it initially seemed like reasonable accommodation rather than the devastating counterattack it actually represented. Dr. Johnson reached into her evening bag and withdrew a platinum American Express Centurion card, the legendary black card, that required net worth verification of over $10 million and personal invitation from American Express. But Victoria, emboldened by what she perceived as successful social dominance, and perhaps influenced by the evening's wine service, chose to escalate rather than retreat. "I'm sure that's very impressive," she said, her tone dripping with the kind of condescension that revealed her true feelings about Dr. Johnson's presence. "But this is a private event for established members of our community. Perhaps you'd be more comfortable at a charity function that's more accessible to the general public. The words hit the ballroom like a physical blow, their meaning unmistakable despite their careful phrasing. Victoria Pemberton had just publicly suggested that Dr. Johnson didn't belong among Manhattan's elite, that her presence was somehow inappropriate despite her obvious sophistication and financial capability. Brandon, watching from across the room and interpreting his mother's attack as permission for his own cruelty, added his voice to the humiliation. Some people just don't understand the difference between having money and actually belonging somewhere, he said with the casual viciousness that came from never having been forced to consider the consequences of his words. The silence that followed was deafening, 200 of Manhattan's most influential people witnessing a display of prejudice, so blatant it couldn't be disguised as social propriety. Dr. Johnson sat motionless for a moment, her expression revealing nothing of the calculations happening behind her calm exterior. Then she stood with fluid grace, her dignity intact despite the public assault on her character and credentials. Dr. Johnson's response to the public humiliation that had just unfolded would become the subject of whispered conversations in Manhattan's elite circles for months to come, not because of any dramatic confrontation or emotional outburst, but because of the devastating power of absolute composure in the face of inexcusable behavior. "Thank you for clarifying the nature of your event," she said, her voice carrying across the silent ballroom with the kind of professional calm that made the Pemberton family's cruelty appear even more grotesque by contrast. "I clearly misunderstood the invitation's implications about inclusivity and community values." The words were delivered without sarcasm or anger, simply a factual observation that highlighted the gap between the evening's charitable facade and the reality of what had just transpired. Dr. Johnson gathered her evening bag with unhurried precision, her movements conveying dignity that couldn't be diminished by the social assassination attempt she'd just endured. As she moved toward the ballroom's exit, something remarkable happened that the Pemberton family would later realize should have served as their first warning about the magnitude of their mistake. Guest after guest rose from their seats, not in dramatic protest, but in quiet acknowledgement of someone whose grace under pressure had impressed them more than any charitable donation could have. Judge Morrison was the first to stand, his expression carrying the kind of judicial disapproval reserved for behavior that violated fundamental principles of decency. Senator Wells followed, her political instincts recognizing that she'd just witnessed something that would have consequences far beyond this evening's social theater. Marcus Chin rose with the careful attention of someone who understood that business relationships could be destroyed by associations with the wrong kind of character. Dr. Johnson paused at Judge Morrison's table, leaning down to speak quietly with the man who'd extended tonight's invitation in good faith. "Thomas, thank you for including me this evening. It's been educational. I'll be in touch about that housing discrimination case we discussed. I believe I have some new perspectives that might be valuable." The judge's expression was grim as he nodded, clearly understanding that his friend had just been subjected to exactly the kind of treatment their professional work sought to eliminate. "Amara, I'm deeply sorry about what just happened. This isn't representative of the values I thought this organization supported." "On the contrary," Dr. Johnson replied with a slight smile that didn't reach her eyes, "I think this evening has been very representative indeed. Sometimes clarity is a gift, even when it comes packaged in ugliness." As Dr. Johnson made her way through the ballroom, other guests intercepted her progress, not to offer sympathy, but to express genuine interest in continuing conversations that had been cut short by the Pemberton family's interventions. Dr. Elizabeth Hardy, the chief medical officer at Mount Sinai, pressed her business card into Dr. Johnson's hand. "I'd love to discuss your thoughts on healthcare access in urban development. Your insights tonight were fascinating." Tech entrepreneur David Kim, whose artificial intelligence company had revolutionized urban planning software, approached with obvious respect. "Dr. Johnson, I didn't get a chance to finish our conversation about algorithmic bias in housing approvals. Would you be available for lunch next week?" Each interaction highlighted what the Pemberton family had failed to recognize, that Dr. Johnson's participation in their evening's conversations hadn't been the intrusion of an outsider trying to belong, but the contribution of someone whose expertise had genuinely impressed Manhattan's most accomplished professionals. But perhaps most telling was the reaction of Catherine Westbrook, the society photographer, whose documentation of Manhattan's elite events served as both historical record and social currency. Catherine had lowered her camera during the auction confrontation, her professional instincts recognizing that she was witnessing something that transcended typical social drama. "Amara," Catherine said quietly as Dr. Johnson passed her position near the ballroom's entrance, "I want you to know that what happened tonight was wrong, and it won't go unnoticed by people who matter." Dr. Johnson's response carried the weight of someone who understood exactly how Manhattan's social networks operated. "Catherine, I appreciate your support, but I've learned that the most effective responses to this kind of behavior don't come from social media or gossip columns. They come from boardrooms and courtrooms, where character actually has consequences." The photographer's eyes widened slightly at the implication behind those words, her experienced ear catching undertones that suggested tonight's humiliation would have ramifications beyond social embarrassment. As Dr. Johnson finally reached the ballroom's exit, she turned back for one final look at the scene she was leaving behind. The Pemberton family stood clustered near the auction podium, their earlier satisfaction beginning to transform into uncertainty as they noticed the subtle but unmistakable shift in the room's atmosphere. Victoria's triumph was already curdling into something that felt less like victory and more like a mistake she couldn't yet define. Richard's businessman instincts were beginning to signal that something had gone wrong, though he couldn't yet articulate what or why. Brandon remained obliviously pleased with himself, unaware that his casual cruelty had been witnessed and catalogued by people whose opinions would matter far more than he realized. What none of them could see, what their privilege had blinded them to recognizing, was that Dr. Johnson's exit represented not defeat, but strategic withdrawal. Someone with her composure, her connections, and her obvious intelligence didn't simply disappear after public humiliation. They regrouped, they planned, and they responded with a kind of precision that came from understanding exactly how power actually worked in the modern world. Did you see the ice-cold composure of someone who knows exactly how to handle bullies? What this woman is about to do will prove that success is the best revenge, and dignity is the most powerful weapon. If you're loving this story of karma coming full circle, smash that subscribe button because we've got the most satisfying ending coming up that will restore your faith in justice. Drop a comment and tell me what you would have done in Dr. Johnson's position. Would you have walked away with such grace, or would you have put them in their place right there? The revenge that's coming is so perfect, so precisely executed, that it'll give you chills. Stay tuned, because what happens next will change everything. But the Pemberton family's education in consequences was only beginning, and what they would learn about Dr. Amara Johnson would transform their world in ways they never could have imagined. 3 weeks after the Pemberton Charity Gala, Richard Pemberton sat in the gleaming conference room of Goldman Sachs, his hands trembling slightly as he reviewed the documents that represented his family's last hope for financial survival. The Manhattan real estate market had shifted dramatically, and their over-leveraged empire needed a $6 billion investment infusion to avoid complete collapse. "Mr. Pemberton," the receptionist announced, "Dr. Johnson will see you now." Richard's stomach clenched at the familiar name, but he dismissed the coincidence as he was led into the executive boardroom. The woman sitting at the head of the polished mahogany table looked up from her files, and Richard's world tilted on its axis. Dr. Amara Johnson, the woman his family had publicly humiliated 3 weeks earlier, sat before him wearing an impeccably tailored business suit, surrounded by legal documents and financial projections that would determine the fate of everything his family had built across 3 generations. "Mr. Pemberton," she said with the same composed professionalism she'd maintained that terrible night, "please have a seat. I believe we have some business to discuss regarding your company's investment proposal." The revelation hit Richard like a physical blow. Dr. Amara Johnson wasn't just some woman who'd wandered into their exclusive event. She was the senior managing director of real estate investment at Goldman Sachs, one of the most powerful voices in commercial development financing, the person whose recommendation could make or break billion-dollar projects across the country. Dr. Johnson, Richard stammered, his legendary composure crumbling as he processed the magnitude of what his family had done. I had no idea. That night at our charity event. Yes, Dr. Johnson replied calmly. That was quite an educational evening. I learned a great deal about your family's values and business practices. Which brings us to today's discussion about your investment needs. The meeting lasted exactly 17 minutes. Dr. Johnson's assessment was thorough, professional, and devastating. She cited concerns about corporate culture, community relations, and reputational risk factors that made Pemberton Properties unsuitable for Goldman Sachs' investment portfolio. Within hours, word of Goldman Sachs' rejection spread through Manhattan's financial circles like wildfire. Other investment firms, following Goldman's lead and unwilling to associate with a family whose character had been so publicly questioned, withdrew their support. The Pemberton Properties stock price collapsed, bankruptcy filings followed, and 3 generations of real estate empire crumbled in a matter of weeks. Richard, Victoria, and Brandon found their penthouse sold at auction, their club memberships quietly revoked, their social standing demolished along with their financial security. The family that had built their identity on exclusion and privilege discovered what it felt like to be excluded themselves. 6 months later, Dr. Johnson stood before a packed auditorium at Harvard Business School, delivering a guest lecture on ethical leadership in real estate development. Her scholarship fund for underrepresented students had raised $12 million, funded largely by investors who'd been impressed by her handling of the Pemberton situation. Character, she told the eager business students, isn't just about being good, it's about being smart. In today's interconnected world, how you treat people when you think it doesn't matter will always matter more than you imagine. And that's how one night of cruelty cost a family their entire billion-dollar empire. Dr. Amara Johnson proved that the best revenge isn't getting mad. It's getting successful and using that success to create positive change. This incredible story shows us that character isn't just about being a good person. It's about being a smart person who understands that how we treat others always comes back to us. If this story of dignity triumphing over prejudice inspired you and reminded you to treat everyone with respect regardless of their appearance or background, hit that subscribe button for more incredible stories of karma and justice. Drop a comment and tell me about a time you witnessed someone's true character come out when they thought no one important was watching. Those moments reveal everything about who people really are. Check out our playlist of similar stories where bullies got exactly what they deserved. And don't forget to share this video with anyone who needs a reminder that success without character is just failure waiting to happen. Remember, you never know who you're talking to, so treat everyone like they might be the person who holds your future in their hands, because sometimes they are. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next story where good people get the recognition they deserve and bad behavior gets the consequences it's earned. And that's how one night of cruelty cost a family their entire billion-dollar empire. Dr. Amara Johnson proved that the best revenge isn't getting mad. It's getting successful and using that success to create positive change. This incredible story shows us that character isn't just about being a good person. It's about being a smart person who understands that how we treat others always comes back to us. If this story of dignity triumphing over prejudice inspired you and reminded you to treat everyone with respect regardless of their appearance or background, hit that subscribe button for more incredible stories of karma and justice. Drop a comment and tell me about a time you witnessed someone's true character come out when they thought no one important was watching. Those moments reveal everything about who people really are. Check out our playlist of similar stories where bullies got exactly what they deserved. And don't forget to share this video with anyone who needs a reminder that success without character is just failure waiting to happen. Remember, you never know who you're talking to, so treat everyone like they might be the person who holds your future in their hands, because sometimes they are. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next story where good people get the recognition they deserve and bad behavior gets the consequences it's earned.